Hello and welcome to another Language Diversity A-Level video. This one is a continuation on from the previous one where we were posing the question, evaluate the idea that distinctive regional dialect forms in the UK are disappearing. Okay, so we had a look at some of the very common non-standard dialectical grammatical forms that you find in English, and I think we came to the conclusion that these non-standard forms are all across the UK, but they're not necessarily distinctive to one particular region. Okay, so in this one, we're now turning our attention to vocabulary, lexis. Okay, so we start with a question. What word would you use to describe what this is? There we go. So pause the video there. You can probably think of the standard form of the vocabulary that you've used for that. Are there any local variants on it? Is there any dialectical lexis that you can think of where in certain areas they use a different form? Okay, so we're talking about the word alley, aren't we? And we're searching for regional variations for the word alley. And lo and behold, there are a whole shed load of them. Twitten, wind, jigger, gully, shut, drangway, ginnel, twitchel, pend, chair, gennel, close, jitty, ope, path, gout, entry, cutting, snickleway, 8-foot, vennel, to name but a few. So many dialectical variations of the word alley in England. Now, in the next slide, I'll kind of give you a little bit of explanation about where you'll find some of those. Whilst we're doing that, you need to think why. Why have we got so many regional variations for this particular word? I mean, after all, we don't have so many regional variations for the word apple or for the word table. So why is it that a concept like an alley has such a variation in different regional dialectical forms? Okay, so let's have a look. Dialectical synonyms for alley. If we go to London, London being a huge place, there is a plethora of different ways to describe an alley. It could be a passage, a court, a place, a lane, and then occasionally words like path, arcade, walk, steps, yard, terrace, and close. These are all synonyms in London for alleys. If we go south and southeast from that, East Sussex, West Sussex, and parts of Surrey, twitten. So twitten is used, it's a narrow path between two walls or hedges. Then go to the West Country, go to Plymouth in Devon, and an alley is called an ope. In the Midlands and the East Midlands, the word jitty is often found, and gully is a term found in the Black Country, which is the West Midlands. Go back to the East Midlands, twitchel is used in Nottinghamshire, and in Shropshire, near Shrewsbury, alleys are called shuts. If we come nearer to my neck of the woods, up in the north, snickelways of York. So York has snickelways, which is this collection of small streets and footpaths and lanes, and so they would be considered alleys. And even closer to home for me, we have Whitby with gorts as well. And there are other variations. If I think of Darlington, where I'm living, we have wind, as in posthouse wind, and up the road we have Richmond with Lombard's wind, I think it's called. These are all dialectical synonyms for alley. Why do we have so many words for the same thing? Well, it could be that these are places, and places have been around for a long time, and places are settled by whole groups of different people. They could have been settled way, way, way long ago by the Angles and the Saxons, or maybe there is Viking influence or Norman influence, etc., etc. So maybe it's the influence of different kinds of settlers who are coming to those areas who've all brought their own distinctive language forms. Place names as well, I mean, they become proper nouns, don't they? So we think of Bullwind, for example. Presumably at one time it wasn't a proper noun. People just said, oh, well, it's that alley where they keep the cows, that's a Bullwind. And then it's become kind of fossilized as a proper noun. So when words get attached to proper nouns, then they're going to stay quite permanent, aren't they? Okay, so there's something very distinctive, and it says something about the discourse community as well. People, as we've been talking about in previous videos, Language is very much bound up with identity. So the identity of the local community is kind of bound up with the very distinctive words that are used. So you'd be loath to get rid of those and use the kind of standardized, homogenized form. There may be a counter argument there to say, look, wouldn't it be more convenient for everybody if we all used exactly the same word alley throughout the country? There wouldn't be any ambiguity. People would know exactly where you are, particularly in an age when people are socially and physically mobile, so people are moving from one part of the country to another. You could argue, oh, it's confusing to have different words for exactly the same thing. Okay, so there's an argument to be had either way about the use of dialectical lexical forms. Okay, so you might want to think of sort of traditional regional lexis that's in your area for certain semantic fields. Okay, and if you look in various textbooks, it always seems to be the same sorts of words that you look at for dialectical lexis. One of the common ones to look at is for these things here, what you would describe those as being. Well, go on, what would you call those things? So if you're from the northeast, I'm just reading here from the AQA textbook, if you're from the northeast, like I am, you might immediately have thought bread bun, stotty, right? In Yorkshire, you might have said, well, bread cake or scuffler. It's one I haven't heard before. If you're from the northwest, you may have called it a barm cake or even an oven bottom. And if you're up north in Scotland, you may have called it a morning roll or a softie. And there are other variations across the UK, such as barra, bap, cob, or batch. Again, you need to think why that particular word has so many variations. Is it because that they are all actually constructed, they're all baked in slightly different ways, and so they've got a different shape and different flavour and different character? Or is it again just to do with local identity and the kind of humour of people in a particular discourse community? Okay, so we've got those. Another favourite area for lexical synonyms is children's games. So try and think of the words that you would describe for children's games, such as TIG, for example, which is being illustrated in that photo. And then another favourite area is, what are these? You know, are these training shoes? Are these sneakers? What do you call them? So there's a more recent kind of addition of all sorts of different synonyms for that thing. Okay, right. So if there is a kind of levelling out of language where actually some of the more distinctive local regional lexical forms are happening, then you're going to call that dialect levelling. So this is the process by which language forms of different parts of the country converge. They become more similar over time. And therefore you get this loss of regional features and you get a reduced diversity of language. Okay, so this is a key idea, isn't it? Because this topic is all about language diversity. And here the suggestion is that over time, perhaps in the UK anyway, that we are getting a reduced diversity of language. So do you think that is the case? Do you think that we're having more dialect levelling? There seems to be certainly quite a body of evidence that suggests that some of the more traditional forms, dialectical forms, are passing away. And here are some of the possible causes for that dialect levelling. We're talking about expressions like this. This, I think, is from a Yorkshire tea towel. So, it's from one of those shops where you can buy things that are distinctively Yorkshire, and it's got all of these idiomatic expressions which come from the Yorkshire area. And one of the big causes of dialect levelling, I suppose, is increased geographical mobility. People are whizzing around the country, aren't they, nationally and internationally? So what you're getting, and this is the words of Milroy, we've come across Milroy before, who did the research, the Milroys into Northern Ireland and the language speech features going on in Belfast in the 1980s and 90s. So Milroy is saying, well, what you've got is large-scale disruption of close-knit localized networks. So in times gone by where people perhaps lived and worked in a very localized area all of their lives, that's been disrupted. People are much more mobile, people are traveling. For example, where I live, they're traveling from places like Reeth, for example, up in the Dales. and maybe you're a doctor, you live in Reeth, but you work in Newcastle. So you've got this disruption of close-knit, localised networks. You've also got the reduction of rural employment. There are far fewer people who are working in the countryside now than a century ago. And you get the construction of new towns and new suburbs. So we're moving to a more kind of urbanised society in terms of population, where the population lives. Here's some stats for you. These are all just taken from the AQA textbook. So in 1831, 34% of people in the UK lived in urban areas. And in 1991, 90% of people lived in urban areas. Okay, so it's the movement away from these rural countryside areas which perhaps has led to the loss of some of those more traditional countryside dialectical forms. You've also got more social mobility as well. So people are no longer stuck, ghettoized in their social class, working class, staying all of your life as a member of the working class. So you've got this breakdown of tight-knit working class communities as well. And also, you've got increased interaction with people of other speech varieties. So we live in an increasingly cosmopolitan kind of society with a lot of diversity and people from different backgrounds, and people interact with those people. And therefore, if you're doing that, you're surely going to end up with a more kind of standardized, homogenized form of language, because you want to be intelligible. You want to be understood by everybody. Okay, so there are some, however, survivors. These are sort of dialectical surviving forms that, despite that dialect leveling, which appears to be happening, these cling on. So we've got things like this, the addition of the S inflection in present tense verbs, things like I likes. And remember the research done back in the 1970s by Trudgill, who did a lot of research in the East Anglian town of Norwich and found that you could link together people's non-standard forms, like that S inflection, with their social class. So I likes, that still survives. We have the multiple negation, I didn't do nothing, which in a previous video I've explained is really actually a lot to do with emphasis as well. It's, it doesn't just say I didn't do anything, but it really stresses and emphasizes the lack of culpability. I didn't do nothing. You've got uses of words like ain't as an alternative to isn't. You've got the use of this adverbial never as a negative marker. I never done that. You've got the use of demonstrative adjectives which are non-standard, like pass me them books over there, which, as I explained in the previous video, that would be considered non-standard because them is a third person plural object pronoun, whereas here it's being used as a demonstrative. It's a word that's demonstrating where the books actually are. And then you've got things like plurals, absence of the plural inflection. It's 12 miles to Richmond. Or if I asked you how tall you are, I'd say, oh, I'm 6 foot tall. I wouldn't say I'm 6 feet tall. I'd say I'm 6 foot tall. And the fact that you've got the determiner, the number before there, makes the need, I suppose, for a plural form redundant. You don't really need it. Okay, and then you've got the absence of adverb marking, like he played bad. These are dialect leveling survivors, okay? Are variants from standard English spreading across the country? That's an interesting question, isn't it? So there is some research that's mentioned in the textbook by Folks and Doherty from over 20 years ago in 1999, and they looked at accent feature, this TH fronting. So that's the replacement of that fricative phoneme, which we represent with a TH digraph. So the replacement of the with a or a. So that's called TH fronting, and as in North London. So this feature actually seems to have spread, and it's spread from its kind of London origins right across the country. And according to Folks and Doherty and their research done way back in the 1990s, it's done it in a certain kind of order. But obviously it started off in the London area, and then it spread to the southeast, to places west of London like Reading and north of London like Milton Keynes. and then it became noticed in central England, like in the Midlands and South Yorkshire and East Anglia, then northern England, and right up to the northeast in Scotland and Newcastle and Glasgow. So their research seems to show this variant from Standard English kind of spreading right across the country. Okay, so we've come full circle here. We're back to this question of evaluate the idea that distinctive regional dialect forms in the UK are disappearing. We seem to be suggesting that there are lots of non-standard forms that are going on, that actually there are these survivors. So all of those grammatical forms that we talked about last video and on this video as well. But we are suggesting that this phenomenon of dialect levelling seems to have happened for various social reasons. And we've focused in on particular words, haven't we? So we did the work about alley and barm cakes and various other lexical variants. And we sort of tossed around the idea of whether it was actually a good thing that the language is becoming homogenized and standardized so that, everybody can understand each other very directly, or whether actually this reduction in diversity is a bad thing, and it's a loss of distinctive identity in local communities. Okay, thank you very much.